Hey everybody, James here again for our weekly Monday Night Magic show. I'm here with Ryan Hare.
Hello, everybody.
He played this weekend at Grand Prix New York. He was playing Bant Company. He ended up going to a 10-5 record. We're going to sit down with him and we're going to discuss the deck, some of his card choices, good matchups, bad matchups, the things he played against. We're going to go over all that good stuff. I'm going to turn it over to Ryan. He can tell you why he played the deck and what he enjoyed about the deck.
All right, so I picked Bant Company because I really like flexible decks that present a lot of options to the player, and in this case, Bant Company is the best example of that in Standard. I think it has a lot of different options you can go with, a lot of different creatures you can play, and you can snowball very quickly off of your collected companies. And it's a fun deck to play. It plays at instant speed a lot, and I've tried a couple different configurations for it, and I really like the one that I'm settled on now, but I think I may change it up again. But we can go over this list and we'll take a look at it. So let's get into it. Okay, so I started with, look at the creatures first. 4 Duskwatch Recruiter, 4 Advocate. That's very stock in Bant Company. Those are very good 2-drops that perform very well for their cost. Duskwatch Recruiter lets you pick creatures out of your library and can flip into a creature that makes them cheaper. And it's quite a good card advantage engine and tempo engine. And Sylvan Advocate is the Tarmogoyf of Standard right now. It is a very efficient creature that gets bigger as the game goes on and grows your man lands too. So it's very efficient. I like it a lot. The Lambholt Pacifist is a little off the path for this. And I like it because it gives you a way to pressure green-white tokens very, very early with Dramoka's Command, because it's a 3/3 for 1 in the green that it can only attack if you have a 4-power creature, but if you have some way to buff it, you can use that to attack and get a very undercosted creature, essentially. So I found it very useful. It's good at blocking against aggressive decks and also pressuring green-white planeswalkers.
And it doesn't die to one of the best sweepers in red, which is Kozilek's Return.
Yes.
And if you do buff it, another huge thing with Dramoka's Command at some point, and it's flipped over, they can't just easily languish it because it becomes a 5/5 with the 1/1 counter on it.
Right. Dramoka's Command is very good with this card in a lot of ways. So it helps you specifically for green white. That was a matchup I tested a lot, and that deck proved to be very popular at the Grand Prix. So that's kind of how I arrived at that. Moving on to the 3-drops, the Tireless Tracker is very good in this deck. It provides a lot of card advantage and also, again, pressures planeswalkers. It's very good with Evolving Wilds because you can get 2 Investigate triggers off of it, and drawing cards with it and growing it is very, very useful. It's a good card advantage engine and provides good pressure too. So Reflector Mage is very standard in Bant Company. It provides a lot of tempo. It's great at instant speed. Very tricky. End of turn, collected company into any number of creatures. Specifically, Reflector Mage is very good. And Bounding Krasis is another version of that. It can tap something down. You can hold it up, again, play at instant speed. So those are the main 3-drops. I played 1 Nissa Vastwood Seer just as a card advantage engine that's good off collected company. So that's pretty stock 25 hits for collected company. I'm not playing Jace, Architect of Thought, because I'm expecting a slightly more aggressive meta, and Jace is not great against green-white tokens, so I've tried to shift my whole deck around that. So that's where
fair.
I start. Yeah.
It's that deck has taken down at least in the top 8, it's been quite a force to be reckoned with the past 3 weeks. So that is definitely a good call, and I don't foresee that deck falling out of favor anytime soon.
It is not going anywhere. So.
It just hits you with so many different options, so many different angles that there's no way to just counter the deck completely, aside from, a whole lot of just dedicated removal and, violent plague effects and stuff.
Right. It's a very versatile deck. It's very durable and has a lot of different types of threats. So you have to attack it from a lot of different angles all at once. And moving on, those are all the collected company hits, which we'll get to that card. But 2 Archangel Avacyn. This card's just very strong. I hadn't played Standard for a bit, and I got into playing a little while, and I just could not beat Archangel Avacyn. Anytime my opponents drew more than I did, they beat me with it. And after playing with the card, it's as good as advertised, and it continues to be as good as advertised. It's very strong. It's the flash 4/4 flyer that makes all your guys indestructible for one turn, and then can also flip into a bigger flyer that kills your opponent very quickly and also wraths their board essentially. So Archangel Avacyn is definitely as good as advertised, and even though it's a 5-drop in a deck focused around 3 converted mana cost creatures, it's still very powerful. So the spells, I only played the 4 Collected Company, which is a 4-mana instant for 3 and a green that lets you look at the top 6 cards of your library and pick out 2 creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less and put them into play. This is both card advantage, tempo, mana advantage, basically everything you can want in a card, and lets you be as flexible as possible. And it does have some variance angle to it, where sometimes you whiff, sometimes you hit 0 creatures, maybe you hit 1 that you didn't need, but it evens out in the long run. And for all those whiffs you get, sometimes you get double Reflector Mage end of turn, or Bounding Crisis and a Tireless Tracker, and then you untap, draw a bunch of cards, and get a lot of pressure off of that. So Collected Company is a very powerful card with variance attached, but that there's a lot of upside to it. Dramoka's Command is pretty standard in this. It's a very efficient spell. It's very flexible. It lets you play at instant speed again, and it combines well with the Lambholt Pacifists and pretty much every creature in your deck. Because it lets you take out their creatures as well as making your creatures bigger at the same time. And it also has the advantage of dealing with various enchantments, which there are a lot of very strong ones in the format right now. So it's an excellent card. It's very flexible and gives you a lot of options with it. So moving on to the mana base, this is pretty stock. I changed a little bit. I'm only playing 4 total blue-green sources, and extra basic or so on top of that. But Bant Company lives and dies by its mana pretty much. Yeah. It's one way to put it. You are playing a 3-color deck in a format that does not have great mana for supporting 3-color decks, but if you can make it work, the payoff is very, very high. So try to play a lot of basics with this. You're going with a lot of basics and Evolving Wilds, which acts as a tri-land, which can either get you forest, plains, or islands. And then you have 4 each of the Canopy Vista and Prairie Stream from Battle for Zendikar. Those synergize very well with basics. If you can go turn 1 Evolving Wilds, because you have no 1-mana plays in your deck, turn 1 Evolving Wilds into another basic that will let you play a 2-drop on turn 2, and then you just play battle lands for the rest of the game and you're happy. All your mana comes into play untapped other than turn 1, which you don't care about, and then you can cast your 2-drop, your Reflector Mage, and then Collected Company. Curving out is very important to Bant Company, and the games you curve out are the games that you end up winning, and the games where you don't draw your mana and don't curve out, that's where you run into trouble. So I'm looking at the mana base, and one thing that strikes me as maybe a little surprising is that you only have 2 Lumbering Falls in the deck. Generally speaking, I feel like I see a lot of the decks running and jamming all 4 of the Lumbering Falls just because of the importance of manlands and the ability they give you to tempo swing, especially Lumbering Falls because it's hexproof, and it works so well with Sylvan Advocate where you can just accidentally put 2 advocates in at the end of turn with a company and then untap and be swinging with an 8/8 Lumbering Falls as well as your 2, 4, 5 Sylvan Advocates. Why so few? Why did you choose 2 as your number? It's a good question. I know a lot of the pros had started off with 4 Lumbering Falls, and when Andrea Mengucci played this list at the Pro Tour Shadows over Innistrad, he played 3 Lumbering Falls and 2 Coast, and I think he cut one of the basics for that extra land. But like I said, this deck lives and dies by its mana. So the Lumbering Falls is a nice late game mana sink and does synergize very well with the Advocates. Say end of turn you Coco into 2 Advocates, you're adding 12 power to the board at that point. So that it is very good, but this deck has a lot of mana sinks. If you notice, you have the 4 Duskbotch Recruiter, which you can activate for 3 mana as many times a turn as you want, and get creatures that way. You have your Tireless Trackers, which provide you with basically an endless stream of cards every turn because you pay 2 mana, you make your land drop, and you sack that clue, and then you draw a card off of it. And having a lot of mana sinks is very good, but having too many can kind of clog it up, and having untapped lands come into play untapped and using them that turn is very important. So the Yavimaya Coasts are a concession to that. But having some number of Lumbering Falls is really important. I know Andrea Mangucci settled on 3-2 Falls Coast, and I've seen a couple different variations, and I tweaked the mana a little bit in mine, but I've been totally okay with just having 2. You have enough mana sinks and enough things to do with your mana that having 2 untapped lands from the Yavimaya Coast is very relevant. And the Pain lands dealing damage to you, it does come up, but it's not super relevant. You're only playing 2 of them, and there are no more fetches like last standard, so you really don't take much mana damage from your mana base. So that's pretty stock main board, basically just the Lambholt Pacifist over the Jace. So the sideboard is really interesting for this deck because you are a Collected Company deck, and almost always after sideboard you remain a Collected Company deck. And the importance of that is that you have to maintain a certain threshold of creatures in your main deck, because otherwise, if you're Collected Company into 1 creature or nothing because you don't have enough creatures in your main deck, then you're not really getting any advantage from that. So you basically shouldn't be playing that card anymore. And it's very matchup dependent. And I noticed the first time I actually played this deck, I didn't have a sideboard because I just built it for the day, and I actually didn't have too many problems because the deck functions very well by itself. Obviously, you do want a sideboard, but under sideboarding is usually better than over sideboarding with this deck because you can't dilute the density of your creatures too much. So if you notice, I have 2 Dispel, 2 Negate, 2 Stratus Dancer, 2 Den Protector, 2 Clip Wings, 2 Tragic Arrogance, 2 Declaration in Stone, and then 1 Dragon Lord Dromoka. And this is kind of a very well-rounded sideboard I like, and it's got some counter magic in it. You have a couple hard removal spells in the Declaration in Stone. The Tragic Arrogance is a very big swing in a lot of matchups, which is important. Den Protector lets you rebuy spells. It kind of acts like an aggressive Jace, and that you can cast the spell that you've already cast. And chaining Dromoka's commands or Collected Company is very good, and it provides you a lot of advantage. And Den Protector itself is a good way to pressure Planeswalkers and your opponent. So the Dispels and Negates come in a variety of matchups, and you don't want too many of them. Having a couple is fine in most matchups, as well as the Stratus Dancers. Those are excellent cards. They come in against green-white because they also bring in Tragic Arrogances and Declaration in Stone. And if you can use your Dancer to negate essentially one of their Tragic Arrogances or a removal spell or something like that, then you can provide a massive tempo swing and finish off your opponent that way. So yeah, again, the trick to sideboarding is you have 25 company hits main board, and then you want to maintain that number if possible. So if you cut a company hit, you have to put in a company hit. So let's say you take out some Lambholt Pacifists and bring in some Stratus Dancers, because the Stratus Dancers they act as a spell-like effect off a creature, and the creature you can still put into play off Collected Company. So let's say you brought in a negate instead of a Lambholt Pacifist. Obviously, if you see that Lambholt Pacifist, or what would be that negate off a Collected Company, you can't put it into play. Whereas the Stratus Dancer, even though it's meant to be a negate type effect where you counter an instant or sorcery, you can still put it into play off Company. So it lessens your chances of whiffing, and having a 2/1 flyer is pretty relevant sometimes. I've had games where I've just played a Stratus Dancer on 2 and a Stratus Dancer on 3, and then my opponent played a Planeswalker and I attacked it and killed it, and they played another one and then I attacked it and killed it. So sideboarding is very tricky for this deck, and you have to be careful to not over sideboard, but you also have to recognize sometimes when you move off of your company plan. Like there are certain matchups like the Black-Green Sacrifice deck where I board out my Collected Companies and board into counterspells because your creatures are all better than theirs, and controlling their Collected Companies is the way you win the game, because if you stop them from resolving, they can't snowball you, and then you can just beat them with your better creatures. So
now, Clipped Wings, I noticed that's in there as a 2 of. Obviously, the green-white token deck can just turbo out into a Ormondel. Now, is that what that is for in the matchup, or is that more for a different matchup?
Clip Wings ended up being kind of a mistake. I didn't really use it much. Based on Esper Dragons winning the Toronto Grand Prix the week before, I expected a fair amount of people to move on to that deck, and Clipwings is fantastic against them. If they tap out for Ojutai on turn 5 and expect to block with it, because it is hexproof, and generally they could expect that, Clipwings destroys that strategy. They lose their Ojutai, you pay 2 mana, and then you attack through them, and your Esper opponent has no way to win the game because you've killed their win condition, and their blocker, and their card advantage all in one. So that was kind of a concession to the Esper matchup, and I never played Esper Dragons. I did play a different variant, but I did not board that in once, and I don't think it's necessary. I would definitely cut down to 1 if I played this again, but it does have some applications elsewhere. It was primarily for Esper Dragons, and you were referencing Ormondal and the Westvale Abbey against Green-White. Basically, they don't get to do that a lot. The games do develop into a board stall, but they're frequently broken by a tragic arrogance or something like that. And if you let Green-White get to a point where they have 5 creatures and a whole turn's worth of mana to do nothing, you are probably not going to win that game anyway. And if they do go for Ormondal, yeah, you could get them with Clipwings. And sometimes Green-White does board into high-impact flyers like Linvala or Dragon Lord Dracoka, or possibly get to a chance where they can flip their Westvale Abbey into Ormondal, but I don't like it. It's a little too reactive, and you're not trying to be very reactive in the green-white matchup. You're trying to be as proactive as possible. This is one of the ways the game plays out is you play a couple, maybe a 1-drop into a 3-drop into a collected company, and by that time your opponent may have some planeswalkers making tokens to block, but you have too many creatures in play, so you can just overwhelm them that way. And boarding in a reactive card like Clipwings against them doesn't really help your game plan of pressuring their walkers. But it was an interesting card. It just didn't work out in the way that I wanted to use it. So
I feel like the weekend before at Grand Prix Toronto, we had 2 clipped wings going into that weekend.
Yeah.
And we ended up cutting the clipped wings for, again, concessions to these aggro decks that are hyper aggressive, and putting Fiery Impulse in and just taking out clipped wings entirely. Obviously, you saw our last week's Magic video where clipped wings wasn't necessary because we could just put a 10/10 Hydra in front of Ormondal.
Right.
And, the Flyers aren't as big of a worry as far as, like, the Dragons go, because we just have big guys that we can just throw in front of them. And it's not really profitable for, the other decks that are not playing Ormondal to kill our World Breakers. Plus, we had World Breakers, so it was able to shoot down an Ormondal before it could flip in the earlier turns. I'm going to pull us over, and we're going to get you back on camera. We'll go over some of the matchups you had over the weekend.
Sure.
All right, so take us through. Obviously, you had 2 buys going into the weekend. Take us through what matchups you played and how they played out.
Okay, so coming off my 2 buys, I went into round 3. I got there on time. Everything worked out, luckily. But I played against Mono White Humans, which is a very popular deck. It has a lot of different ways you can play it, different splashes and whatnot, but generally you try to play 1-drops into Thalia's Lieutenant, which pumps all your humans, into Always Watching, which is a powerful enchantment which gives all non-token creatures you control +1/+1 in Vigilance. And that deck is trying to run people over as quickly as possible with as little interaction as possible. So what Bant Company wants to do in that matchup is first not die and then turn the corner on your opponent. So they try to play a lot of creatures early. So any trading you can do, whatever. If you can trade even a Sylvan Advocate for one of their pumped 1-drops, it's still good because they will run you over if you don't react quickly enough. So this is one matchup where Reflector Mage is excellent because they can play a 1-drop and pump it with something, and then you can trade that off. Maybe they play a couple other guys, and then if you Reflector Mage one of their guys, it puts them back so far, and it gives you a blocker, and then it buys you time to start casting Collected Company. So once you can get to that point, then you can really interfere with their plans, and Dramoka's Command in particular is almost your most important card in this matchup because it lets you, it makes the target opponent sacrifice an enchantment, so you can get rid of their Always Watching and then fight one of their creatures. And the way the sequencing works on Dramoka's Command is you it's resolved in order of the card text. So the first thing on there is prevent damage from an instant or sorcery, which doesn't come up that much. But then it's sacrifice an enchantment, and then add a counter, and then fight. So if you choose the modes, target player sacrifices an enchantment, and then fight 2 creatures, the always watching will die first, and your opponent will have to sacrifice that, and then their smaller creature will now fight your creature. So let's say they have a 3/2 or a 2/1 rather, that's pumped through a 3/2 from always watching, and you have a 2/3 reflector mage, for example. You can make them sacrifice the always watching, and by the time the fight happens, you will be able to kill their 2/1 with your 2/3. So that's one way to generate card advantage in the matchup, and also tempo, because if you kill their guys, then you can start attacking them and they can't attack you. One of the popular counters to that strategy is Griff's Boon, which is a 1-mana enchantment that gives their creature flying and +1/+0. So you can also return it from the graveyard for 4 mana and attach it to a creature. So it's a way to combat Dramoka's command, but at that same point, Bant Company is able to pressure enough that your opponent just can't spend 4 mana for free. They have to spend their whole turn doing it. So let's say you fight a creature with the Griff's Boon on it, and they spend their turn attaching it to their next creature. If you have another Dramoka's command, then you can make them sacrifice the Griff's Boon mid-combat, and then move to blocks and block it with one of your ground creatures when they were expecting it to be flying. So Dramoka's command is very good in that matchup for a lot of reasons, and that's kind of how it played out for me. I was able to win that 2-0 based on some very, very timely Dramoka's commands and ways to deal with his flyers. So that wasn't too much of an issue. But Mono White Humans is very popular, and they can definitely beat you, but Bant Company has been able to contain that aggression pretty well. So moving on, the next round I played against a Naya Planeswalkers deck, which I don't know if people have seen that list, but it tries to basically be green-white tokens, and then you splash for Radiant Flames, and also Chandra, and possibly Nahiri I've seen in some versions.
Yeah.
And those are very powerful cards, and they do come at the expense of a 3rd color. But the Radiant Flames is good for the mirror to mop up your opponent's tokens. So it's a reasonable meta call for the week, and I think one of them did end up placing in the top 32. But in that matchup, game 1, I was able to snowball with Collected Company and beat him down before he was able to kill me. So that's kind of one of the benefits. Sometimes you can just oops somebody and kill them with creatures because you have 10 power on turn 4 and your opponent can't handle it. So it's pretty powerful. Game 2, I didn't see a lot of his deck game 1, so he kind of, I did not board properly. I should have brought in Tragic Arrogance to deal with it. He was able to just play lots of Planeswalkers and deal with my aggression and use Chandra to sweep my battlefield. But game 3, I was able to play the tempo game and just run him over with Collected Company, and that's kind of one of the themes of the deck. So anytime you can hit Reflector Mages or Bounding Crisis end of turn and throw off your opponent's curve and their tempo, you can take advantage of that. So that was definitely a good matchup. But then round 5, I played against Andrew Tenjum, who is a pretty notable player on the SCG circuit. He's designed some decks, and he was playing green-white tokens. And I forgot the order of the games. I think I lost game 1, but game 2 I was able to pressure his walkers, get creatures into play, snowball my Collected Companies, and take care of his Gideons, take care of his Nissas, and same thing for game 3. It was a very close match, and Tenjum is a very good player, and that's what happened. Game 1 took almost 30 minutes between the two of us, and it was a very back and forth game, but the board had stalled out between Avacins and various flyers and ground creatures, and it got to a point where I had a flipped Nissa Vastwood Seer, so I was drawing a bunch of cards, and I was Duskwatch recruitering, and I was casting Collected Companies. Like, I never ran out of stuff to do with my mana, but it just didn't matter because I couldn't get through the board. I couldn't get through his flyers, and I couldn't get through his ground creatures, so he was able to just eventually overwhelm me, and we were 30 minutes into the round, and I at one point I was ahead. I thought I could win, but by the time he cast his multiple Avacins, I was not able to win from that point. So we shuffled up very quickly for game 2, and I managed to do the Bant thing where I attacked him down and took him out, and it was great. Same thing for game 3 pretty much. So that was a very interesting round. So starting out 5-0 was pretty strong.
Yeah.
Moving on, I played Matt Severa, who's a Wisconsinite, I believe. He's one of the limited specialists there. He was on black-red, and basically Grixis, but without any blue cards. It's just a pile of removal and Goblin Dark Dwellers. And I had some interesting games there. I was able to win game 3 on a mull to 5. Based on I was able to curve out. I played a 2-drop into a 3-drop into Chain Collected Companies. I basically cast 3 in a row and then just ran them over. And that's one of the advantages of this deck. You have those nut draws sometimes where you can disable your opponent.
Crawl right back from a mulligan as long as you hit 4 mana.
Yep. It's Collected Company is everything you could want in a Magic card in terms of mana and tempo and cards. It's very good. So good for digging you out of holes. What was the next round after that? I know that was... I played against... That was 6-0, and I played against an Esper, not Esper Dragons, so my Clipwings were not useful. It was just an Esper control deck, and he cast Descend Upon the Sinful.
Ooh,
which,
spicy.
There's a mistranslation for that card in French, so we like to call it the Descend Upon the Fisherman, because that's how the accent is interpreted in the French card. So I was descended upon by Fisherman that game, and it did not go well. He was able to stabilize game 2 at exactly 1 life, and then cast a Sorin, and he actually had some Gideon tokens in play. I tried to negate his Gideon, and he had to dispel for it, and the Gideon made tokens every turn for the rest of the game just to block mostly. And then at one point he had a couple in play, but he was worried about dying, so he played a Sorin, Sorin Grim Nemesis, and -5 to kill one of his own tokens, but gain him 5 life, so he went up to 6. And after that, he was able to chain his Sorin card advantage and finish me off. So that wasn't a great performance, but it was a couple interesting games. So I wasn't expecting pure Esper Planeswalker control. He also had Secure the Waste and Westvale Abbey in there. Yeah. So he had quite a variety of threats, and didn't work out. But then I played against. It's round 7, round 8. I think I played another green-white deck, and this is why you play the deck Collected Company, or the card Collected Company and Bant Company, because again I was probably should have lost that, but I had some very strong Collected Companies. Basically end of turn, bounce a guy with Reflector Mage, tap a guy with Bounding Krasis, and then attack him, generate tempo that way, and he fell too far behind, and that's just how the deck works. It's very able to contain the Planeswalkers in green-white pretty well, and I was definitely a fan. I was sold after that. My companies were hot fire, and sometimes it doesn't work out. And when you whiff, you remember those, but the good companies are also good. Anytime you hit double Reflector Mage, it's hard for that to be bad. So yeah. So moving into round 9 at 7-1, I was feeling pretty good. I was already well locked for day 2. I was trying to improve my position and go 8-1. I played against Ralph Batesh, who was the winner of Grand Prix Eldrazi, otherwise known as Grand Prix Detroit. And he was playing Grixis Control, which ends up being one of the biggest stories of the tournament. But he ended up in the top 8, and he beat me not soundly in 2 games, because I really tried to get back in there with some good Collected Companies and tempo, but I was not able to get through, and he beat me 2-0, but the games were very close. I had a mulligan to 6 in game 2, which was able to get some traction, but he just had too much. But game 1 was very interesting, because I was able to contain his Kalidas, Trainer of Get, very, very well with some Reflector Mage. And Kalidas is kind of the hallmark card in that deck, and many other black mid-range decks, because if you can play him and then use a removal spell on one of your opponent's creatures, you get a 2/2 straight off. And
tempo swing is so key with that as well.
Right. It turns every removal spell in your deck into a 2-for-1 in a deck that tries just 1-for-1 most of the time. Grixis and various black decks try to do that. And having Kalidas be an engine in and of itself that also gains you life and also kills your opponent very efficiently is very strong. So Reflector Mage, however, is a good counter to Kalidas, because if your opponent tries to cast a removal spell with a Kalidas in play, say main phase on their turn, you can Collected Company into hopefully a Reflector Mage, bounce the Kalidas. It will still kill your creature, but at that point, they're so far behind because they've lost their whole turn, basically spending mana on Kalidas and a removal spell, and you just put 2 more guys in play. So again, you can chain that tempo advantage, and I was able to get him down very low game 1, and then he was able to stabilize and kill me with a Goblin Dark Dwellers, which is another good card in that deck. basically a Snapcaster Mage for removal spells, and does whatever you want it to. So
Card's powerful.
yes, it's a very good card. So I ended up losing that, but 7-2 after day one was a very strong finish. I was pretty happy with it. I was hoping for a little better, but not bad at all. And moving into day two, this is where we get into the boogeyman of the format, I think.
The
This is,
boogeyman.
4-color rights. I don't know if you've seen this deck, but it's based on the Zulaport Cutthroat, Eldrazi Displacer, and Brood Monitor 3-card combo. And this, they're all uncommons from Battle for Zendikar, ironically. But this combo, you have the 3 creatures in play, and once you have that, you have your opponent dead. And the infinite combo works by you use Displacer to pay 2 and a colorless to essentially flicker on any target creature other than itself. So you sacrifice your 3 Scions you get from Brood Monitor. You activate the Displacer, targeting your Brood Monitor to flicker it, and it exiles it and returns it. You make 3 more Scions, but you can repeat that as many times as you want, and every time you do it, you trigger your Cutthroat 3 times. So your opponent will die if you have the 3-card combo, because every iteration, which you can do as many as you want, that will drain 3 life, and then soon your opponent will not have any life left. And it's a very, very good backdoor combo in that deck. But the key strength of that deck is that it's not dependent on winning with that combo. It also, because it's 4-color, it plays black and green for the core of the sacrifice deck, and then it splashes white for the Eldrazi Displacer, and then Reflector Mage also splashes blue for. And Eldrazi Displacer works very favorably with Reflector Mage. Every time you have 2 and a colorless mana, you can target your Reflector Mage and flicker it, return it to the battlefield, and get its enter the battlefield trigger, and bounce one of your opponent's creatures. So if you're a creature deck trying to win against the 4-color deck with Eldrazi Displacer and Reflector Mage, you basically can't attack them because they will flicker all of your creatures every turn. And one of the ways that deck uses Cryptolith Rights very well, which is one of the namesake of the deck, it lets all your creatures tap for a mana of any color. Because you have so many random creatures in your deck, that's all those creatures essentially turn into Eldrazi Displacer activations. So once you get that, then you can just use your Displacer and Reflector Mage to take over the game, or you can flicker your Elvish Visionaries to draw cards, or just Brood Monitors. That combo lets you scry any number of times. If you just have Displacer and Brood Monitor, and you have the 3 Scions, you can sacrifice those. You'd also need a Catacomb Sifter, but you can sacrifice those, and every time you sacrifice a creature with Catacomb Sifter, you get 1 instance of Scry 1. And basically that lets you pick up your deck, put it in the order that you want. Essentially, you have to keep the cards in order, but you can scry any card to the top, and then it lets you find the 3rd piece of your combo, the Cutthroat, for the next turn. So that's a very good backdoor combo option in that.
Another alibi for Eldrazi Displacer is, while you're not only just bouncing your own things and getting the tempo off that, it also can flicker your opponent's things, and it comes back in tapped, which is huge against like the Go Big Ramp decks, because they can just keep flickering your big things and never let them attack and never let them block. So if you just keep flickering their World Breaker, it doesn't do anything because it's a cast trigger, not an enter the battlefield trigger.
Right.
So it just keeps the way clear for all of your little guys to just run through the line when you need them to, before comboing.
Right. It's essentially 3 mana tap a creature, which in a deck with Cryptolith Rights and a lot of excess mana is very good at dealing with, say, Sylvan Advocates that have Vigilance, or Archangel Avacyn. And one of the things about Archangel Avacyn is that against the black-green version of the Rights deck, she's one of the best cards you can play, because she's both a clock and a way to wrath their board. So if they don't have an ultimate price and you've triggered your Avacyn, on the next upkeep, you can flip it, deal 3 damage to their whole board, which kills every creature in their deck, except for possibly a Nantuko Husk that they would have to sacrifice all their creatures to. But using that as a way to wrath the black-green Rights deck is very strong, because you also get the clock at the same time. But the problem with the 4-color Rights deck is, if you try to go that game plan and pass the turn to them on their upkeep, and you go to flip your Avacyn into the 3 damage to all creatures and 3 damage to your opponent mode, they can just Displacer it. and nothing happens. The Avacyn leaves the battlefield and forgets the delayed trigger, and once that happens, nothing happens after that. So they have a built-in protection against one of the best cards against that deck, and that's one of the reasons why you splash the blue and the white. It seems very greedy because you're also splashing colorless at the same time, so you're essentially a 4.5 color deck, but it's very powerful and the rewards are very well worth it. So
but almost all the creatures in that deck, because the deck still plays the Loam Dryads, correct?
Right, yeah. It plays
So
Loam
they
Dryad.
can make any color mana easily.
Right.
The hardest part is to make the colorless mana, but with all of the pain lands in the
Right.
format, it tends to be really
Right.
easy.
They play 11 or 12 pain lands, and Yavimaya Coast, Llanowar Waste, and another one, I forgot the third. But the Cryptolith Rites kind of fixes the mana a lot, and the deck is very reliant on Cryptolith Rites and Loam Dryad, but if you can get those going, you can generate a massive mana advantage, an engine, and use it to dismantle your opponent however you want. Essentially, you can play for the combo, you can just play for the tempo Reflector Mage plan, or you can basically do whatever you want. It's less reliant on the Zulaport Cutthroat kills that the black-green deck is known for. The black-green deck like to put a bunch of Cutthroats into play and then sacrifice its board to drain your opponent out in one shot. Whereas the 4-color deck is more flexible. You can buy a lot more time and use the Duskwatch Recruiter, which is the other key key part
card's
there.
so good.
Duskwatch Recruiter is one of the strongest uncommons in Shadows over Innistrad just because it fits in a lot of places. It's used as card advantage in the Bant deck that also makes your creatures cheaper, and it's used as an engine essentially in the Displacer deck because you can pay 3 mana and then look at the top 3. If there's a creature, you just take it and put it in your hand. And it lets you use your excess mana for something in the same way that Eldrazi Displacer lets you use all that mana you can generate. So once you get to a point where you have a lot of creatures and a lot of mana, then you can use one of your
Break board
engines.
stalls, yeah.
Yes, use one of your engines to either one-shot your opponent with a 3-card combo, or grind them out, or remove all their blockers and attack them. So 4-color Rites is definitely one of the strongest decks on the weekend, and it ended up showing up very strong in the top 32 meta. So I played that round 1 of day 2, and did not go so well. Game 1, I did not pressure them nearly as much as I could, and I couldn't snowball the companies. So that didn't quite work out. In Game 2, it got to a point where I was behind on mana, and I was trying to keep some pressure on, but he had too many creatures, and I got to finally drew my 5th white source for Tragic Arrogance, and then this is one of the strong points of 4-color Rites in that you play blue, so you get to sideboard negates, and my opponent's last card in hand was a negate. So the card that was supposed to wrath his board and basically stabilize the whole game for me didn't matter because he is now splashing blue for the trump to my trump, essentially. So that deck is dangerous for a lot of reasons, and that's one of them, being able to play counter magic, and it's quite strong. So that didn't go so well. The next round is a little unfortunate. I played against Naya Walkers again, and I think my opponent just wasn't having a good day. He was a little frustrated after game 1, and then mulligan to 6, and then 5, and then 4, and then conceded game 2. So he's not having a good day. I wished him better. So I think he went home and spent Mother's Day with his mom. So that was good. But sometimes that happens. For all the games that you run hot and do really well, there are just as many that you get blown out horribly. So I hope he had a better day. But after that, I then played against Jonathan Murawski on the 4-color Rites deck. He's a New York player. I think he plays at Kierwins down near Albany. He's a very strong player, and he beat me very soundly. He demonstrated why the 4-color Rites deck is very strong. And I'm not positive, but I think he either sideboarded out his collected companies in game 2 or ended up just scrying every single one to the bottom, because my game plan against the black-green Rites deck was to board in counter magic and control their collected companies and then clock them with whatever I had. And I didn't see a single company game 2 from him, and I think he just took them out because they weren't necessary. His game plan was just Displacer, Reflector Mage all my creatures, and make me waste all of my time and then eventually kill me. So he was able to assemble the combo game 1 after I had kind of an anemic start, and then game 2 took a while. We were going to go to a draw even if I won game 2, but I did not, so he 2-0'd me with a couple minutes left in the round. But the deck is very grindy and plays a lot of alternative game plans very well.
Now, would you say that you were underprepared for that deck specifically? I mean, clearly it made a resurgence, and
Right.
it made its, for all intents and purposes,
Essentially
it's made its head this past weekend
Right.
as like a forerunner of the format. Now, in looking at the format, do you think it became a forerunner because the green white tokens deck is so good, and it's a way that green white tokens can actually interact
Yeah.
because their removal is not only is it creature based and being able to flicker their stuff out of it, but like hangerback's really good, and when you flicker it, it comes
Right.
back in and just automatically dies
Exactly.
if they don't have some anthem effect on the board.
Yeah, four color rights uses the core of the black green rights deck, which is very strong at PT Shadows over Innistrad. But what it does is handle the hate for it very well, and it handles green white tokens pretty well because, like you're saying, the displacers can deal with their tokens or their hangerbacks or their creatures, and eventually you can just snowball all your creatures into your combo kill or your advantage through your different engines. But it also gives you a lot of resilience against Kalidas, which is typically the strongest card against the black-green deck, because Kalidas would turn off all the dies effects, like
Yeah.
Zulaport Cutthroat. It basically makes it. You can still activate Nantuko Husk, but it's not nearly as
Yeah.
good if you're not getting the dies triggers off your Cutthroats and your Scries from your Catacomb Sifter. So the four-color rights deck was a way to combat the hate for the original black green rights deck, and I think that was Seth Manfield and his team that came up with that, and they played it in Toronto, which ironically he didn't end up playing at Grand Prix New York, but we can get there in a bit.
Yeah,
But
I think I played against Seth Manfield in Toronto in the very last round,
Right.
and I got a small taste of it, and I was so on tilt by the last round that I kind of stopped paying attention a whole lot, and he just ran me over with displacers and stuff. So I ended up not seeing as much of the deck as maybe I'd have liked to. But yeah, it seemed like a really strong deck. Like it was
Right.
doing a lot of things right for that weekend.
yeah, it's very versatile. And the first time I heard four color rights, I immediately thought, wow, that's incredibly greedy.
Yeah.
You're playing at least last format, you could play 16 fetch lands in your deck and get whatever mana you needed whenever you needed it. In this format, it uses the Evolving Wilds as basically a four color land. You can fetch any of the colors you need from your basics. And then you also have your Pain lands, which work. They're tri-lands for Eldrazi Displacer because you get the colorless off of them. So very flexible in that aspect. And four color rights, it deals with the hate for that deck very well, and also gives you a good game plan against the best other deck in the format, being green white tokens. So it's a very good choice for the weekend. And I was like, to answer your original question, I was not prepared for it. I was prepared for the green white tokens matchup, the black green rights matchup, the original version of that deck, and Bant Company can handle a lot of random decks just through your collected company plan. So I was prepared for those decks, but the uptick in Grixis decks was very noticeable. Grixis had a very strong presence and did very well in the top 32 meta. So that was another one I wasn't quite ready for. And my two losses on day one were to control decks, Grixis and the Esper variant. And then two of my losses on day two were to the four color rights deck, decks that I was not quite prepared for. So yeah, it's hard to anticipate everything, and you try to build your sideboard as best you can, but sometimes there are things you can't account for, and sometimes you can just collected company people, and that's good enough, but
That's
not always.
what it's good at.
Yeah, not always. So that I was definitely underprepared for the four color rights deck, and now that I know how it works and I played against it more, I can approach it differently. I may move off of Bant Company moving forward. But it's still, if I did stick with it, there are options you could use against them. Not anything fantastic, but Declaration in Stone is strong against them, because if you can deal with their displacers, the deck basically does nothing. If you kill their displacer, it's a bunch of dorky creatures that are smaller than yours that can do things, maybe like Recruiter can draw cards, but one Reflector Mage is not going to beat Bant Company. If you're just playing one, they can't tempo you out quickly
Because
enough.
your four mana spell just cheats the guys
Exactly.
that they potentially just bounce
Yeah,
back
so
into play.
they could bounce one of your creatures with a Reflector Mage, and then you could play two off a Collected Company and run them over that way, and then bounce whatever, or Dramoka's Command their guys, and you can get ahead with that. So it doesn't function well if you don't have Displacer abusing the Enters the Battlefield triggers in that deck. So if you can use spot removal to kill their Displacers or exile them with Declaration in Stone, you can take control of the battlefield that way, and that's kind of one of the options I was looking for, either playing more declarations or possibly more tragic arrogance, because that is very good at managing their creatures, and your creatures are pretty medium sized, so even if you're left with one, they can present a lot of pressure.
You can also get them by just leaving their token in play.
Exactly.
And
they have a lot of bad creatures in their deck, so it's very easy to pick the worst one.
Yeah.
Usually it's a Scion or an Elvish Visionary or something. So Tragic Arrogance is strong against them, but like I was saying, what happened to me in the Swiss, the negates out of the board got me.
Gotcha, yeah.
And
That can be a tough thing to play.
He had one card left, and there's always that hope that it's not something relevant, but in that case it was. And I've done the same thing towards people before. I remember playing against Andrew Brown at GP Detroit, and he was playing Ad Nauseam and I was on Eldrazi, and I got into a scenario where I was clocking him just enough, and he had one of the combo pieces, and he top decked the other one, and he's like, "You got it?" Stubborn Denial, and I was countered his last card and basically untapped and killed him. So that's scenario does happen.
That's magic.
Yes, that scenario happens. And to be fair, I had crafted my whole game plan around having that Stubborn Denial, so there's a lot of leeway in that aspect, but my opponent boarded very correctly for that situation and managed to counter my counter to his deck, so he anticipated that, and I'm sure he tested that matchup or similar matchups. So
when you're ahead of the meta, it's a lot easier
right.
to predict what's going to be there.
Right.
Being behind the meta per se, not that Bant Company is behind the meta,
Yeah.
but Bant Company is just so well rounded that it just can't be pushed out of the meta per se.
Yeah.
So, Bant Company really, you go in playing against what you anticipate seeing, and
Right.
seeing a 4-color crazy deck like this
Yeah.
is just, it can get you by surprise if you're not ready for it.
Yeah, and I had a basic knowledge of how the deck functions from the Black-Green Rights deck, but I kind of underestimated the Displacer Reflector Mage. And Cryptolith Rights, giving all of your creatures the ability to make mana, lets you activate the Displacer as many as 4 or 5 times in a turn.
It gets crazy.
So that really just invalidates my entire strategy, and I'm drawing to a Tragic Arrogance to wipe his board. Otherwise, my cards don't do anything.
And he knows that too.
Exactly.
Because he's already got the pre-testing to know that that's the only thing you have to deal with it.
Right, and that's why the Rights deck is very powerful, because you have your combo finish, but you also have the various backdoors you can go into and your engines that you can use to take over the game in whatever way you want. So there's a lot of ways to play that deck, and it's very flexible. So I definitely underestimated it, but it happens. You can't do everything perfectly in Magic, so it was a definite learning experience. So moving on, I finished the day up with I played against Black-Green Rights, and my sideboard plan worked exactly as I intended. I was able to pressure him game 1 and basically snowball collected companies and attack him with creatures, so he couldn't get his Ormondal or any of his Nantuko Husks or Cutthroats going. And game 2, I had Dispel into Stratus Dancer. I had 1 blue mana untapped because I played some creatures, and he main phased the collected company, which is generally correct because I can't negate it or Stratus Dancer it or something. But because of Dispel costing 1 mana, I could still cast my creatures on my turn. Play a 2-drop on 2, play a 2-drop on 3, and then still have the blue up for Dispel. So by the time he got into his 4th turn, he main phased it to play around Negate, and I Dispelled it. And that put him so far behind at that point, because he was unable to get some of his creatures into play to block or to start his Cutthroat chains. And because of that Dispel basically won the game on turn 3. And if I didn't have it, he would have been able to start getting his engines going, and that plus Stratus Dancer.
That deck is very, very anemic without company. It needs to have the card advantage generated out of collected company in order to press advantage, because that's the one thing, my biggest gripe about that deck. Like, I typically like combo-y type decks, and that is something I did like, but just you have to play all the lackluster creatures that are only good with other creatures on the board that make it good, and you're completely based around casting the best for
essentially the best
spell in the format, and everybody's ready for you to cast the best spell in the format, so you're not surprising anybody when you pass turn with 4 mana available and they know what's coming.
So a lot of the things that the black green rights deck does well, the 4-color rights version does pretty well also. It's not quite as good at the combo. It's not quite as good at getting Ormadal going, or like I said, chaining Zulaport Cutthroats. But at the same time, it's much less vulnerable to hate. Like, my opponent, I believe Murawski sided out his collected companies against me because he was expecting me to bring in counter magic for them. And I ended game 2 with multiple Dispels in my hand and multiple Stratus Dancers because I never had a chance to cast them, essentially, because they didn't do anything.
Yeah.
So he was definitely ahead of it right there, and that's the versatility of the 4-color rights deck. Like, you're not dependent on collected company. You can just get your Cryptolith rights and Mana Engine going, and then you can win that way. So that kind of really illustrates the difference between the black-green and the 4-color rights deck, where my plan worked exactly as intended against black-green, but did essentially nothing against the 4-color deck. So that's kind of what it is. But it was a interesting match against black-green. So
all right, well, we got about 5 to 6 minutes left for taping for the show. I'm going to switch us back over to the deck list. For, I know you said that you kind of wanted to change off of Bant Company, maybe moving forward. I mean, you never know. There's might be a more powerful deck in the format with the Grixis deck or this 4-color rights deck. For anybody who does want to play this deck going forward, even between like an F&M or even more competitive to take it to the next large event, what kind of changes would you make to this deck list and the sideboard?
There's a couple things I would do. The Lambholt Pacifists were very good for me, but I don't think you need 4 of them. They're great on turn 2, and they're okay to hit off company, because usually you can get your creatures big enough to let them attack. But you don't really need 4, and I could see easily playing 2 of those, and then possibly 2 Den Protectors main board. I know Fabrizio and Terry played roughly this main board for Toronto, but he played 3 Pacifists and 2 Nissa. So there's a couple different ways you can tune it. But I still think I really like Tireless Tracker. It was good in a lot of matchups, and the Reflector Mage, Bounding Krasis are automatic 4-ofs. So you can play around with some numbers there, and Den Protector is very versatile. Lets you buy back Dromoka's commands or companies or dispels or whatever it is you want in that matchup. And you can see him in my sideboard. I think it's a very good card. I don't think you need a ton of it main board, and that's kind of the same way I'm looking at the Pacifist now. So I was looking at playing 2 Pacifists main board and cutting 2 of those for Den Protectors, and then leaving everything else the same for the main board. I like the numbers on a lot of the other cards. The oneness is just fine. I still want the Avacins, and Dromoka's Command continues to be one of the best cards against a lot of the decks in the format. So
is there any case to be made for maybe a 2-2 split with Dromoka's Command's deck in stone? Or, I mean, typically speaking, most of these company decks have 10 slots allotted to them that aren't companyable. And obviously 4 of them are company, otherwise you're not dedicating 10 spots to it. And, you've mentioned how nice Avacyn is for the board and how well placed it is in the format. Now, that obviously leaves the only 4 spell slots left are where you have your Dromoka's commands. Is there any case to be made for deck and stone main deck, or do you think the Dromoka's commands are probably where you want to be?
I would stick with the commands for right now, just because it's very flexible and you're not giving your opponent the clue off the declaration, but a lot of times they won't even be able to crack that and use that at all. But at the same time, having an instant speed response to something and a way to deal with always watching Griff Spoon and specifically Cryptolith rights, which that's one thing. The black-green deck wasn't necessarily reliant on Cryptolith rights, it just turbocharged it, whereas the 4-color rights deck is much more dependent on it. Like, it needs it to function, and if it doesn't have it, it's back to the anemic creatures mode. And Dromoka's Command being good against rights is very worthy of main decking it. So I would board into the Declarations in Stone, and that's one of the major things I would change in the sideboard. But I think I still want for Dromoka's Command main board. I know Brad Nelson posted a list with this, and he added an extra land, which I actually like a lot. It does cut into your company hits or your non-company spells. I think he cut a Dromoka's Command for a land, just because you want to curve out. But
you could mitigate that by having the Den Protectors in the main deck. That at least gives you potentially 5 Dromoka's commands in the main deck.
Right, exactly. And like being able to rebuy Dromoka's command is a way to win a lot of matchups, especially as humans. It's very strong against dealing with aggro spoons and always watchings. And if your opponent, normally Cryptolith's Rites is useless in redundant copies because the first one does everything you want, the second one does nothing. But if they do draw multiple rights, then you need multiple Dromoka's commands for them. So running quite a few is very good. But Dromoka's,
Plus, I think Den Protector is also underrated in the line of text that it also has that says it can't be blocked by creatures with less power.
Yes.
Very good. Super relevant when it comes to, bringing them into play and having ways, especially against the green-white decks, having a way to just swing
tokens
through those tokens and get into the planeswalkers, because those are where its power is.
Right. It's very underrated on that. People forget about that line, and then you make a 5/4 Den Protector and kill their Gideon, and because they can't block, and then you start attacking them, they still can't block it, and then they die. So it's quite good at that. But on Dromoka's command, it is one of the cards that sideboarded out most, because it's not great on the draw, because you have to have a creature in order to use the removal spell side of it. So it does get taken out a lot, but it's so good again in so many different ways main board that I like having it. Well, one of the really interesting uses I had against Grixis was my opponent had a Chandra, and he also had a Goblin Dark Dwellers in play. I had a Bounding Crisis and a Reflector Mage, and he went to -3 his Chandra to kill both my guys and keep his alive. So I thought about it for a second. I could have just ended turn Collected Company at that point, but because of Dromoka's command's versatility, the modes I ended up using, I had my 2/3 fight his 4/4, and I put a counter on my Bounding Crisis, so that my Bounding Crisis was a 4/4 with 3 damage marked on it from the Chandra. My 2/3 died, but it was going to die anyway. And his 4/4 had 2 on it from my fight, and then also 3 from the Chandra. So I used my Dromoka's command to effectively counter his Chandra and kill his 4/4. And
kill the Chandra on the same deck.
The attack, untap and kill it with my Crisis. So that's the kind of versatility you don't get out of almost any other card in Standard. It's only stuff like Collected Company can be that insane, or Archangel Avacyn can do stuff like that. Dromoka's command just has so many different ways you can use it that I really like having it. So even in matchups where it's not great, you can still use it effectively main board. Whereas sometimes Declaration in Stone is just not useful or not what you want. So I'd stick with the 4 Dromoka's command main board.
Fair enough.
But as far as the sideboard goes, I would cut the Clip Wings right now. I'm not a fan of them. They're not super relevant to the game plan. Tragic Arrogance is something you want a lot, and it's one of your only outs to certain situations. So I could definitely see moving up to 3 for that, and possibly 3 for Declaration in Stone. But you also wouldn't need to play the Den Protectors, so you could play with those slots too.
Frees up some space.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of flexibility with this, but one thing I would recommend if you do play this deck is to nail down your sideboard plans and know what you're going to do in each matchup, especially what you're going to take out. That's almost more important than what you're bringing in. But just kind of sit down and plan out your moves for what you're going to do with your sideboard and your main board, because if you get to a point where you're boarding out too many creatures for spells, then you're not really going to get anything going with your Collected Company. So you're just playing a Bant mid-range deck at that time. So just nail down a sideboard plan and know what you're doing going ahead. And that kind of was very well illustrated for me, because the matchups that I was ready for, and I was able to do what I wanted in every matchup and get ahead that way. And the decks I wasn't quite prepared for, the control decks and the rights decks, they ended up getting me pretty good because I didn't have a plan. So I'm actually looking at some Gaia's Revenge in the sideboard for spice against the control.
That's pretty good. I've lost a game or two myself to it. The only thing that hits it is a Tarka, as far as removal in a lot of decks. So
yeah, it's a bit of a stretch, but you definitely have time in the control matchup, and they cannot deal with it. Grixis has no ways to interact with it outside of a pumped Kalidas. They don't even play sacrifice effects really. They just kind of have targeted removal, so they can't target Gaia's Revenge. It's an 8/5, can't be countered with haste, which is pretty good at killing your opponent. And the only way they can interact with it is blocking it, so they have to have some tokens and Kalidas or something like that. And I don't know if that's right, but I'm going to try it out because Grixis looks to be pretty popular moving forward. But that's one of the things that I was looking towards. So there's a couple of options.
All right. Well, that's going to conclude our Magic Show. I'd like to thank Ryan Hare for being here with us. He's been out there representing WNY Gaming at all these big events. You can see him out there. He usually has his polo on, and he has his name on him. We appreciate everybody tuning in. We look forward to it. Again, this is a pre-recorded broadcast. If you have any questions, by all means, go to the Facebook page. I'm going to try this again right up here. I almost messed that up last time. Appreciate you guys all tuning in. If you guys have any requests for anything at a future date, if you're local to the area, you go out to a big event. I know we got our PPTQ this weekend. We're always looking forward to having players come in, give us a rundown, let us know, get some notoriety in the area, and really put Buffalo on the map. Going forward, if you need to get a hold of us, by all means, go to the website, give us a shout. Again, I'd like to thank you, Ryan,
Thanks for
coming in and giving us the rundown, and look forward to seeing you guys out at the tables.